Appraisal of REO and foreclosure properties. Chapter 4, Client and Intended Users.
Client and Intended Users. Assignment Element 1. Client and Intended Users. Client is defined as the party or parties, that is individual, group or entity, who engage an appraiser by employment or contract in a specific assignment, whether directly or through an agent. 7. Intended user is defined as the client and any other party as identified, by name or type, as users of the appraisal or appraisal review report by the appraiser, based on communication with the client at the time of the assignment. 8. In a mortgage origination assignment, the client is often the lender, and intended users, as identified by the appraiser, could include other participating lenders, secondary market participants, and/or government agencies, for example the FHA, USDA. In an REO appraisal assignment, the client could be the lender, an asset management company, or a government-sponsored enterprise. For example, Fannie Mae does not order origination appraisals, but they do order REO appraisals. Intended users for REO appraisals, as identified by the appraiser, might include government agencies, mortgage insurance companies, or other third-party entities. Why is it important to identify the client and intended users? The amount and type of information to be included in the appraisal report is based on the needs of the client and intended users. If the client and intended users are well-versed in valuation theory and are familiar with the property, the appraisal report might contain a minimal presentation of information. Conversely, if the client and intended users are not knowledgeable in valuation theory and/or are unfamiliar with the property or the market, the appraiser must provide additional information in the report to ensure that the client and intended users can understand it properly. 7. The Appraisal Foundation. Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. Washington, D.C. Appraisal Standards Board, 2024 edition. Definitions. Exhibit. End of page. Intended use. Assignment Element 2. Intended use. The intended use of a REO appraisal is different than the intended use of a mortgage origination appraisal, even though both types of appraisals are done in relation with a mortgage finance transaction. For example, HUD Handbook 4000.1 states that the intended use for an FHA origination appraisal is solely to assist FHA in assessing the risk of the properties securing the FHA-insured mortgage. For a HUD REO appraisal, the handbook states the intended use is as one of one or more evaluation tools to establish list price or subsequent price adjustments. These sample statements illustrate the difference between the intended use of an origination appraisal and an REO appraisal. In a mortgage origination appraisal, the intended use is typically to assist the client in making a lending decision. In an REO appraisal, the intended use is typically to assist the client in making decisions related to disposition of the property. Of course, it is important to remember that the appraiser identifies the intended use of the appraisal based on communication with the client at the time of the assignment. Since the credibility of the assignment results is judged within the context of the intended use, it is critical that the appraiser appropriately identify the intended use in every appraisal assignment, whether the subject is in REO property or not. End of page. Definition of value. Assignment Element 3. Type and definition of value. Another of the assignment elements is the definition of value used in the appraisal. In an appraisal report, an appraiser is required by USPAP to 1. State the type of value. 2. State the definition of value. 3. Cite the source of the definition. There are many different types of value. Market value is just one type of value. In real property appraisal, market value is perhaps the most commonly used type of value. Hence, it is easy to assume that the client is looking for an opinion of market value. This could be an incorrect assumption and could lead to a non-credible value opinion. When appraising REO properties, an appraiser should not automatically assume that a client is seeking a market value opinion. Sometimes a lender who plans to sell a property at a loss within a restricted marketing period is looking for an opinion of liquidation value or disposition value. The appraiser should communicate with the client to ensure that the appraisal reflects the appropriate type and definition of value. End of page.